Hi there, this is John Lebensold for KillerPHP.com, and today what I'm going to be doing is looking at how we can use Ajax with PHP, and to do that we are going to be using the jQuery library. So I'm going to start off by again just deleting what we have from our last video, so we can start from scratch again. Or not too much from scratch, we'll just have a very simple project set up here. So I'm going to call this Ajax with PHP. And I'm just going to save this file as Ajax with PHP.html. And there we go. So if I go back to Firefox right here, I should be able to say Ajax with PHP.html, and we get ourselves a wonderful page with just this stuff. Okay. So in order to do this, we're going to be, this example will take the place of some kind of search for usernames. It's not going to be particularly fancy, but it should illustrate the the power of working with Ajax and how we can use Ajax to essentially make recalls to some kind of dynamic content using PHP. So I'm going to start with a couple of divs. We're going to have a div called content and another div of type, I'll just give this an ID because there's only going to be one. I'll just call this Ajax response. And inside it I'm going to create a div that's just going to be empty for now, but it'll just say please submit the form. Now you might be asking what form? Well, we're going to be writing one. Start with a nice paragraph saying get full name from a username. And I'm going to create a form. Very important to give the form an ID and a name. And usually it's also important to have some kind of action associated with it, but we're going to be doing this using Ajax, so we're not even going to be touching the forms action. In fact, we're going to be specifying that in an Ajax call. And here I'm just going to have an input of type text, no prescribed value to begin with, and it's going to have a name and a value, or an ID of uname and a name of uname. In other words, this is the name or the ID of this particular text box. Close that tag. And we'll do the same thing here. We'll have a submit. And the value for submit buttons is the name of the button. And then we'll just close that. So if I refresh this again, we say get full name from a username. We've got this form. Normally if you hit submit, you can see that on the get line up here, the uname, whatever I put in here, immediately gets submitted. So we can see that our form is working, although not very interesting quite yet. So with this all in place, we're going to take a look at what PHP can provide us. We've created a front end, we're going to be creating a back end, and then we're going to be creating the glue, which is the Ajax that'll tie the two together. So I'm going to start by creating a new file. I'm just going to save this file as request.php. Now, since this is a PHP website, I'm not going to go into too much detail about some of the basics, since you can grab a lot of that from the rest of Killer PHP, which has a lot of fantastic tutorials, which I highly recommend you take a look at. But we're going to have this username variable, and it's going to be populated by uname, which is our variable from the form. So this key right here corresponds with this ID and this name over here. So there's a direct correspondence. Now, in the DOM manipulation tutorial, we created a template, and this template was used to essentially create our request and to populate our table with a whole bunch of data. It was static data at this point, but now we're going to be doing something a little more dynamic. So to start off, I'm just going to create a function called getTemplate. And it's going to take in a name and a username. And the template is going to return a div of type box. And it should have a header 1 with the name. And we'll have a div with a meta, with a username. And then we'll just close the box div. And there we go. So we've got a very simple template. We're not using it yet. If I wanted to actually see what this looked like, I could just echo get template John J. Lebensold, which is a common username of mine. And if I echoed this and went to request.php, well, we're getting an undefined index on uname. We'll fix that in a minute, but you can see that we've got John and username J. Lebensold. So I could just say, let's just clean this up. So I'll say if it's not set, in other words, if uname is empty, then we'll just say username not found. So now, actually, we'll just echo that. And we'll just return. So this should stop us dead in our tracks. Now, this isn't very handy for debugging, but luckily we're only using the GET request. We're not using POST. So it's actually quite easy to trick our PHP script into running correctly. So what I'm going to do here is instead of saying get template with John and J. Lebensold, I'm actually going to grab the username and just pass it in here. So now if I go here and I say question mark uname is equal to some username, then I will get John, username, some username. So far, this all seems to be working correctly. Now, I'm going to create a very, very simple list. And you could imagine that this list could come from some kind of database, or whether it's a MySQL database or an XML file with a whole bunch of key value pairs, or you could do some complex SQL queries to get some information. But this is going to be very simple. We're going to be using a function here called getName, and it's going to be taking in a username and returning the person's full name. So our database is really small. It's only got 4 names in it. It's going to have a J. Smith, which maps to John Smith, E. Roberts, which maps to Emily Roberts, and Yazdan, which corresponds with Neda Yazdani, C. Lim, which corresponds with Chong Lim. So you can imagine that this could have been any list of names, but here are some usernames and some corresponding full names. We'll add a bit of validation here. So I'm going to say if array key exists where the name is found in the names list, return names name. In other words, return the full name. And if not, return username not found. And up here, so there's no confusion, I'm going to say uname not defined. We've got 2 different errors happening here. So far, so good. So this is our backend. We've got this function which does a get name and gives us a full name. Actually, I'll just say get full name. That's a little more descriptive. And we've got this template. So now instead of just echoing John, which isn't very interesting, we're going to echo get full name, username, and then the username, and we're going to grab that from the template. And you can imagine that the functions that you see below are, they could be in another file. They don't necessarily have to be in this file. But again, this is a very simple project, so it's only 33 lines. I'm going to take some liberty and just stick it just underneath here. So with all of that in place, I should be able to get some kind of div with a class of box with the person's name and then their username. If I go back to my ajax with PHP here, it's just a matter of doing the call from whatever the user inputs in this text box. So let's get started. I'll start off with attaching a listener to the form. Instead of using the .click event, which we've used several times, I'm going to use the submit event. And I need to be careful to return false or else the form is going to be submitted. So now if I go back here and I refresh this and I say get full name, you'll see that it no longer submits the form anymore, which is actually a good thing. If you were doing a high-end website that needed to degrade gracefully, then you would be also making sure that when you submitted the form, it would take you to a server-side equivalent of the client side. And this would work because when the person didn't have JavaScript, then this code would not show up and the submit would actually function correctly. What's nice about this is that you're actually not you're not muddying up your HTML with any of the JavaScript that you've got prepared up here, which ideally should be in another file. So in here, I'm just going to create a function, or I'm going to be using the function for Ajax, provided by jQuery, and we're going to be using our squiggly braces again. And here we're going to be specifying the type as get. The URL this time is going to be request.php. The data, which we didn't look at last time, is actually the variable data that we're going to be passing to our PHP file. And this is the same thing as having that URL be modified with the parameter uname. So here, we're going to be using this JSON format again, except just inside the data section. So I'm going to open up some curly braces, and then we've got success, which is going to be an anonymous function with the response from the server. So in here, we want to specify the parameter uname with the value of whatever is in the text box. So whatever uname is here, which corresponds with whatever's in the text box down here. We'll have the parameter name uname, which will get grabbed and pushed into the get object that we've got here. And then we're just going to echo that template. So far so good. And then in the success, we're going to be doing a couple of things. But for now, I'm just going to keep it very simple by doing an Ajax response and appending whatever the response is. If I refresh this again and I do get full name, it'll say username not found. If I put in J Smith, then I'll get John Smith and his username. If I get E Roberts, get full name, Emily Roberts, there you go. So far this is actually working quite well. And of course, if you took the time to add your CSS to this page, then that would be rendered really quite nicely. So we're going to take a hint from the last video tutorial that we did, and we're going to be attaching some effects to this. The first one is I want to make sure that I can actually fade out whatever is currently inside the Ajax response div, because this is what keeps getting populated with more and more DOM objects, right? So to do that, I'm going to select any div inside the Ajax response, and I'm going to do a fade out. We're going to make it fast. Now, something we didn't cover before is that you can actually attach a callback to the fade out function. Now, a callback is a function that runs after the fade out function happens to run. So we do a fast fade out, and then we want to do something else. And we don't want that other thing to happen before the fade out happens. Now, one way of achieving this is to use timers, but timers generally don't work properly in production because you never really know if your time is on or not, and the way browsers run things, sometimes it can be a little off sync and it looks weird. So that's where callbacks come in. So here in the fade out, after we put in the parameter fast, I'm going to just do a comma, and then I'm going to create another anonymous function. And then we're just going to close that. So once we fade out a particular div item, then we want to remove it from the actual page. So to do that, we're going to say Ajax response div dot remove, and this will remove whatever we just faded out from our page. Now we want to append the response object, but we're going to do this in the same style that we did last time. So we're going to take our response variable, and then we're going to hide it first, and then we're going to fade it in. So let's see what happens here. Pretty cool, eh? So that concludes my introduction to using Ajax with PHP. The next video that we're going to be looking at is going to build on this in a really kind of neat way. We're going to be looking at how we can take the Ajax stuff that we've done here and kind of, look at what we can do with JSON. So you've been seeing these curly braces before, but they can be used and extended, and we can actually create objects in jQuery, and then we can use those objects with templates. And then after that, we're going to finish this tutorial set by looking at how we can actually serialize or encode PHP objects into jQuery objects. Thank you for listening.